What's going on, people? We are Tottenham TV, back here for some more content for you guys today, and it's some interesting talking points today. We're with Sean Butler of Spurs Talk Show. How are we doing, Sean?
Good, thank you, Ben. How are you, mate?
Yeah, all good. Ready to get into this with you guys. And I know, Sean, you've got a keen eye on this. We're talking about the Man City charges and what it means to Spurs, and if Spurs fans should be rethinking their ENIC stance with everything that's coming out with Man City at the moment. Just to recap, what's been said is that after an investigation lasting more than 4 years, the Premier League released a statement on Monday saying it had charged Man City with over 100 breaches of financial rules from 2009 to 2018. In terms of the charges, there are two areas where the charges are put against them. First, accusations that Man City have artificially inflated the money coming into the club with particular respect to commercial and sponsorship deals. The Premier League appears to be claiming that the money was actually coming from the club owner, which doesn't count towards FFP, but was being disguised as sponsorship income, which does count towards FFP. The other charges are in relation to Man City being alleged to have artificially deflated the costs of running the club by having managers on contracts with another company connected to the owners, so that they only put through a small element of the true costs of managing the club through the books. So what are you thinking about this, Sean? First and foremost, what was your takeaway and your first thoughts when you heard about all this?
My first thoughts were, about time. Like, it was clear to me for so long that there was, ridiculous, what seemed to be ridiculous representation or misrepresentation, as it looks like it has been, around where the sources of money come from. I always use the phrase that for certain owners of certain teams in the Premier League, the most difficult thing to do is to hide the sources of money, not to find the sources of money. And when you see some of the sponsorships, some of the companies or the parent companies that are, registered as sponsors of Manchester City, and you look at their website and it looks like a 10-year-old made it, and it doesn't have any real discernible product or service. Like the address of the company, like the London addresses of the company are essentially like PO boxes that doesn't really have any employment, and yet they're sponsoring the club for ridiculous sums of money. Like you kind of, it's, you'd have to be a little bit naive to think that it's sincere or legitimate, and actually it's all just one hand washes the other, a cyclical pattern of people that are, that have as much money as they could possibly want, just finding the ways to legitimize without having to fall foul of certain regulations their behavior in the Premier League and how they can afford to pay the players and pay the salaries that they always have done in the past. And whilst the past is the past, what that has allowed them to do to stay within FFP in the future is by buying some of those players, and then now they seem to be able to legitimize their net spend by selling a lot of players that they don't necessarily use, loaning players out, inflating those valuations. And so whilst it might have an apparent cleansing effect now, and it looks like they're behaving in a certain way now, all of that was as a consequence, if proven to be guilty, of the misdeeds in previous years. And in terms of things like what they did with Mancini, or alleged to have done with Mancini, paying a significant or a not insignificant percentage of his compensation through third parties for when he was going and being essentially contracted for 4 or 5 days in the Middle East for certain seasons. That is a way in which you can essentially restrict the cost or dilute the cost structures of your running operational expenses every single year, which has this ability to then make your club look more profitable than it does. And in the previous version of FFP, that was imperative. And in the future version of FFP, that would also be imperative when you have, certain frameworks that you can work to. I think in the next version of FFP by 2025, you're only allowed to have 70% of your costs that can be attributed to salaries of your staff, your players, or agents' fees or transfer fees on any given year. And so that kind of behavior, had they got away with it for as long as they have, it essentially allowed them to get away with, buying players that they wouldn't otherwise have been able to have done, to be able to compete on the pitch at levels that they wouldn't otherwise have done. And on that basis, I think that, it's like doping. And I don't know where we go from here, but I'm sure they're not the only team that's doing certain things, but if they're the first team to be caught, in the Premier League, we have to come down pretty harsh on it if they are guilty of what they've been accused of being up to.
Yeah, talking about like, you know, if they are guilty, is it not like, are you surprised potentially about how, like, if they are guilty, are you surprised maybe about how brazen they are about the money they've been making? Because if you look at, like, say, for example, the commercial revenue, they make more commercial revenue than teams like Real Madrid and Man United and like Bayern Munich, some of the biggest teams in world football. And with all due respect to Man City, I know they've grown as a club over the last few years, but they're nowhere near on that level
Still hardly fill their stadium.
Yeah, I mean, they're nowhere near on that level of Man United and Real Madrid. And the fact that you look at their financial records and they're making more money than them, how is that like only now ringing alarm bells? And like, is it not like really, like, is there any chance that that's real, that is not a consequence of dodgy financials? How is that possible for that to be genuine?
Yeah, I think it would be a little bit easier to get your head around that. Look, maybe, just maybe, you know, there are areas of the world or fan bases, maybe in the Far East or maybe in the Middle East, there is so much attention being paid towards Manchester City that they could generate revenue streams that could make ends meet, that could make that whole story add up. But really, when you look at the actual specifics, the nuances of it, and you see that, you know, 15-20% of the revenue that they're claiming is coming from companies that are, as I say, you know, not really offering any discernible product or service. It would be different if they were representing beer sales or shirt sales, those sorts of things, to make those revenues up. But when it's coming from, you know, weird companies, and like I say, if you check out the websites of some of these companies, they look like, you know, like they're incredibly basic. And yet, if these clubs can generate enough money to justify £25 million sponsorship deals, how does that make sense? It doesn't. And so I agree with you, Sim, that it does look brazen and it doesn't make sense. And I think that's why, you know, certain people, when they were doing the auditing, they were like, well, let's have a look into this. And then as a consequence of seeing the obvious, they then look underneath the surface. And that's why it's taken 4 years, because when you have sophisticated accountants and sophisticated lawyers that can, you know, redirect funds through third parties and through affiliates, etc., then it can be difficult to kind of to follow the paper trail, if you like. But if you know, they've obviously spent 4 years doing it, and it looks like they put together a very, you know, a pretty brutal body of evidence that, you know, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I remember The Athletic did an investigation. This was a few years ago now, a couple of years ago, about one of the betting websites that are apparently sponsoring Man City, and they did an investigation into this betting website, and they found like they went onto the about them page and about all the staff, and like the CEO, they took the picture of the CEO, they just ran it through a reverse Google search, and you just type in businesswoman, and like it's a fake woman. And then like
a stock image.
Yeah, exactly. And like to gain credibility, they did like an interview of like Teddy Sheringham, which got like 800 views or something on YouTube. And then I never did like a video again. And like they tried to get in contact with a lot of these people who, you know, in the contact page and stuff, you can't get hold of any of these people there, and they're not like willing to like say anything. You can't really bet with this company as well. So it's all like incredibly like dodgy. Like when you get to like a lot of these sponsorships.
From what I read, like, you know, I work in marketing these days, and there's tools that you can use that can look at websites and look at estimated traffic that they receive. And when people were putting in that website into these tools that scan the web to see how much, you know, what keywords they rank for and how much traffic they generate, it's all estimated. But essentially, the website wasn't getting any traffic because it wasn't illegitimate, it wasn't a real thing. And so how are they, if an online betting company is supposed to be making money through online betting, you're going to need to have traffic going to the website in order for people to place the bets. And so the whole kind of, you tug away at that kind of thread on the woolly jumper, and eventually the whole thing falls apart. It looks
but you would have thought that this is these are business people worth billions and billions, right? Money is no obstacle. Why not make a convincing lie? If you know what I mean. Why is it so like shoddy? It just seems like it's like so easy to unpick. Like if you can do it, no disrespect to you, Sean, but if we as like normal people can just look at a website and just see this is clearly fake. Like how is it? I just don't understand how it's that brazen.
It feels like, you know, like you see The Wolf of Wall Street and all these kind of films, like with these clear scams where they're selling these stocks and shares for these companies in Gibraltar and Cyprus and all these kind of places, just big pyramid schemes that are just big, complete scams. And that's what this feels like, pretty much. And when you're talking about 100 breaches over a 9-year period from 2009, 2018, I mean, what kind of implications is this going to have on the league? What kind of implications is this going to have on Manchester City? And surely the book needs to be thrown at them at the highest degree, not just a fine where they can easily just pay it and just move on, not a points deduction maybe where it'll just affect them for one season. But in my opinion, they need to be chucked out the league, and they need to be made a example of that. This cannot stand, and this will not be happening in the Premier League or in any sport, to be honest. But obviously we're talking about the Premier League now, but surely the book needs to be thrown at them at the highest degree right now.
Yeah, listen, I 100% agree. And I'm not like advocating for it. If they're not guilty, or if they're only guilty of, say, 20% of the charges, then it depends on the specifics. If they've not done the more significant or severe things, then maybe there's other ways around it. But if it's over such a long and protracted period of time, and the consequences of doping your books, doping your ability to buy the best players, when you pull that fabric apart and you think, well, what is the consequence? You can also look at precedent and look at what's happening elsewhere in Europe as we speak right now. Now, Juventus is a club that have done things, that they've been found guilty of by the prosecutor's office, and they were deducted 15 points for one series of financial mismanagement for misrepresenting, or inflating just player wages. They're not trying to hide sources of money or trying to inflate their profitability. They were doing it in a different way, but to a similar extent. They had a points deduction. However, they've also been accused, which the second stage of that investigation is more around whether or not they were also trying to limit the expenses, a similar thing to what, the Mancini example, but again, via a different method. During COVID, Juventus have been accused of trying to pay some of the players or all of the players 3 months under the table and only recognizing one of them on the accounts. And so if they're found guilty of that, then there's the chances that they could face another 20-point deduction, which when you have a 35-point deduction, if that was to happen right now, Juventus this season, they would be 20th in the league. And so they wouldn't necessarily be expelled from the Serie A, but they'd find themselves in a pretty difficult position to get themselves out of the relegation zone with only 10 games to go or 15 games to go by the time that thing was to come through. So they might, as a consequence, find themselves in Serie B next season anyway. And if you go back to 2008, I think it was 2010, Juventus did get expelled from Serie A for other breaches. So there is a precedent. And I think that Manchester City, whether or not the charges are the same or they're different mechanisms to achieve the same end, if you do look towards Juventus, and they are a Goliath of the Italian league, connections to the Italian government, so it's a big deal over there, huge deal. I don't see why we shouldn't be having the same conversation. And I agree with you, Ben, that if you give them just a financial penalty, then when you have no end, like when money isn't a problem for you, they have so much of it, that's just a slap on the wrist that, to me, doesn't, the ends don't justify the means.
They'll laugh that out of the room, won't they? They'll completely laugh it out the room.
You have to pick one or the other of points deductions or a transfer ban that happens to last for a significant amount of time, or you strip them of their titles and every trophy that you gave them, or you kick them out of the league. Something that really does, send a clear message to any other team that's thinking about doing this in the future. And look, it's only a concern for owners who, as I say, are trying to hide the sources of money, not find the sources of money. And when you know that Manchester United are just about to potentially have the Emir of Qatar that are coming in, and they've got, endless money. So I think that you have to, and maybe even Tottenham might have QSI coming in. And look, there's no shortage of allegations that Paris Saint-Germain aren't up to certain things, who QSI own as well in the past. So I do think with this amount of money that's moving into the Premier League, I think that you have to nip this in the bud now. If it's true, if they're proven to be guilty, I think you have to 100%, the punishment has to fit the crime, and it also has to send a message to the future owners of different clubs that you can't get up to the same things.
But as Spurs fans looking at what's going on at Man City, and obviously we've seen them win so many titles, spend so much money over the last years, but now potentially with these charges, it could potentially all be coming home to roost for Man City. We don't really know, I guess, when they'll be found guilty or not. But does this maybe recontextualize potentially how Spurs and ENIC have gone about their business running the club in the way they have, and maybe considering that to run a club like Man City have over the past 15 years or so is essentially potentially, if we assume that they are guilty, could be tantamount to cheating essentially over the past 15 years. And Spurs doing things in the right way financially, which has come under a lot of scrutiny from the fan base, because we want to see more, investment, we want to see more better players on the pitch to compete. But does that for you? Does it recontextualize a bit some of how Spurs have run the club over the last 15 years when they're in competition with these kind of clubs?
Yeah. I initially put a tweet out saying, "Are Manchester City, if guilty, the Lance Armstrong of the Premier League?" And a lot of people came back to me and said, "No, that's doing a disservice to the scale and the severity of what they've been up to, because Lance Armstrong was the best cheat among an industry of people that were all cheating." Manchester City have won so many different trophies, over that period of time. And look, at the moment, there's no allegations going around anywhere else. But for me personally, I'm incredibly intrigued as to what's going on at Chelsea. I think that I'm not going to sit here and say that I am entirely confident, but I've got my suspicions that writing off $1.5 billion of debt when Abramovich left under the kind of duress of what's happening with the Ukrainian war, you can't operate with debt on the books of a football club under the old version of FFP and then just write it off when you leave the club. Now, the argument to say that didn't happen and that Chelsea just bought the club, bought the debt, and then wrote that off as well, I don't think that holds water, because as far as I understand, the money for the sale has gone into a trust, a fund for the victims of the Ukrainian war, and there's no debt that has been acknowledged or identified. So if Abramovich did just write down the debt, then I think that they too should be investigated. And when you look, the reason I mention them is because when you look at how many trophies have been won by the top 6 teams or the top 5 teams under Daniel Levy's tenure, to get back to your specific question, Ben, 66 domestic trophies have been won since 2001, which is Daniel Levy's start. City and Chelsea have won 27 of them. Right, that's 42% of all trophies have been won. Now, I know that 2001 to 2008 is outside of the specific investigation period for Manchester City, but Manchester City's previous owners before the Sheikh also were, like suspicious and dodgy and other things. So just let me get to the point. I guess let me kind of round this off. 41% of the others, 9 trophies are won by everybody else apart from United, Arsenal, and Liverpool, who have won 30 of the 66. Liverpool have been, accused by many people of misrepresenting how many players have got asthma. Like 62% or something of all of the Liverpool players use an inhaler, versus like the average person in the street is 1 in 20. So I'm not suggesting that Manchester City are the only people that are pushing the rules here and getting away with it for the last period. But when you look at the amount of trophies that have been won, if you just focus on City and Chelsea and say that 42% of all trophies that have been won by people that, for in my mind, have essentially been cheating, or if not bending the rules to the point of breaking. I do think that Daniel Levy and ENIC should be given a little bit less of a stick, battering session every chance they get, because most of the people that are frustrated with ENIC are frustrated, or the foundation of their problem is the lack of trophies. They might have other problems that around the way they do business, the lack of ability to spend money, maybe firing or managers in bad situations, or continuing to employ people for too long. Whatever. There's other things that annoy people about Daniel Levy, but the foundation of most of the resentment is around the lack of trophies. And if you were to go back and look at the history and say that, well, maybe nearly 50% of the trophies that have been won, that could have been won by Tottenham, were actually won by teams that are cheating or potentially cheating, then for me, I don't necessarily think that that we should be so angry, especially when you look at the barometer of real growth and progress. For me, is always league position, average league position, because there's variance in cup competitions, but in league, every single season you have to play everybody twice. And to go from an average position of 15th when he took over to 3rd or 4th now, I think is progress that should be applauded, acknowledged, and appreciated, when most of the teams above us are on some level accused of doing things that they shouldn't be doing.
But there's still the same.
Answer.
No, it's fine. But the same questions are still going to be there about ENIC, regardless of these Man City and Chelsea and whatever you're saying. I mean, the questions are still going to be there. Can they take us further beyond this point of just about finishing in the top four? Can we get some trophies behind us? I mean, you're looking at other clubs as well. You say 42% are won by those clubs, but there's still a big percentage that's won by other clubs where we haven't been present in those trophies. So, I mean, they definitely,
Liverpool and Manchester United have always been bigger than Tottenham, always been more successful.
It's true, but there has been a period where we've been better than them, and we've been consistently better than those clubs, and we still can't seem to get over the finishing line. And it still brings me back to all of our problems with ENIC, where it's like, you don't go that extra mile, you don't push us on, you can't get us past that fourth spot because don't seem interested to be doing that, and you're only interested to bring in that Champions League revenue to finish in the top four, and not really interested in winning an FA Cup or a League Cup because it doesn't bring in the commercial value that maybe finishing in the top four does give you. So
yeah,
I hear you. I don't really look at this and rethink my ENIC stance in to be honest. I don't know what you feel, Sim.
I don't particularly think that this makes them better football operators, but I think maybe you have to have a bit more respect for how they do run things, considering that they are competing against teams who are like Man City, who are essentially pumping money fraudulently into the club to inflate their revenues, whereas Spurs are doing everything legitimately, and we've had to stand by and watch them win trophy after trophy, pumping in more and more money and buying more and more players. And now things are coming home to roost for them, whereas Spurs aren't really at risk of ever being in that kind of situation, and that has to be respected. But does that mean that from a footballing standpoint, from a negotiation standpoint, does that mean they're better now just because these Man City charges? No, I still think they got the same problems from a footballing standpoint. But I think from a structural standpoint of how they run the club, we all complain about how frugal they are and about the money and stuff, and that's fair enough. I think I still believe they should put more risk into the market and stuff like that. I still believe that, but I do think there has to be some sort of respect as well for the fact that they do run things in a legitimate way, in a way which is going to secure the long-term future of Tottenham and make sure that we're not in scandals like Man City are facing right now, which, we would, if you asked maybe a year ago or even, maybe even a week ago, would all Spurs fans like an owner like Man City, would all say yes, but now look at the trouble they're in. And they're essentially at risk of getting kicked out of the league at this point. I know we don't know exactly, but that could be the end game here, and we're not going to be in that position anytime soon, and that has to be respected in a way. But yeah, I still think from a footballing standpoint, they still got a lot to improve on.
The fact of the matter is what you're saying is that we're in a good spot because we don't bend the rules and we run it like a proper ship, unlike Man City, maybe unlike Chelsea, and maybe certain other clubs as well. But the fact of the matter is they put so much effort, so much money, so much time into developing the areas around the pitch, and not enough time in developing maybe the areas on the pitch in the right way. And that's the key problem with Tottenham, and all this stuff has. The only thing it's made me think about with Tottenham is maybe question who we would bring in after Levy, not question what Levy's doing, because the fact of the matter is that we all could agree before these reports came out, before these accusations came out, that the non-footballing side under ENIC has been run really well. I mean, no one has said otherwise to that. Even the most staunch ENIC out people can still recognise that stuff like that has been done in the right way and has been doing in a really good way by Daniel Levy and ENIC. It's the stuff that's on the pitch that has, frustrated people, and I don't think that changes by any of these reports that have come out.
Yeah, I 100% agree, and I'm not asking or even invoking a narrative that people that are Levy out should suddenly be should change their mind. All I was kind of suggesting, especially on the video that I made about it, was more around if you are still open-minded, if you haven't made your mind up, if you're not entrenched in your view, then maybe there's a potential to rebalance your mind a little bit and give a little bit more credibility where it's due. I 100% take both of your points that Daniel Levy and ENIC do need to have a little bit of a higher risk profile than what they do in order to compete. And I 100% take your point as well, Ben, that maybe we should reflect on what is the benefit going forward of having potential, sugar daddy ownership coming in if the noose is tightening, the financial sustainability noose is tightening around the necks. And we've seen with the European Super League thing today, not to get off onto that topic in too much detail, but like one of the kind of tenets of that proposal is that there needs to be even tighter scrutiny around whether or not clubs can spend money that the club doesn't generate, right? So cash injections, the likes of what Todd Bowley is currently doing, or what potentially the Qataris, the Emir of Qatar, might be doing if they take over Manchester United, even what QSI would do if they took over Tottenham. If the European Super League does take shape and does become a thing, then there might be even a stronger movement towards you can only spend the money that your club generates legitimately. And so if any of those things, future visions pan out, then I think that someone like Daniel Levy and ENIC, will increasingly become those sorts of rules would suit and benefit Tottenham 100%. The only other thing I would say, just to round off my point, is whilst I agree with you that nothing necessarily would have happened differently had Manchester City not won those titles, or if they're stripped of them, it still doesn't mean that Tottenham would have gone on to win them anyway, and I completely acknowledge that. However, the connotations of what might have happened, I don't think the solution is to strip Man City of those titles and give them to the team who finished second. Not like an Olympic gold medal 100-meter race where the winner has been doping, give it to the second, because they run their own races, and if you take away the cheat, the second guy would be first. But with these sorts of things, like the players that they signed that they might not have been able to have signed might have gone elsewhere. Like the individual nuances of what would have happened in scenarios where Manchester City or Chelsea couldn't have signed the players that they did or have signed, like squads would look entirely different. The timeline of reality would be entirely different. And so we don't really know what might have happened or what might have taken place in any of the competitions that Manchester City went on and did well in that 10-year period. So I think that, and also I think that the inflation in prices, which has precluded Tottenham from necessarily going and buying the best in the world in any one position, wouldn't necessarily have happened to the same extent had it not been available or not been a possibility for people like the Sheikh to go out there, fill all the books, and then spend big money and push those prices up. So we don't know what the world of the Premier League would have looked like over that previous period. What I do want to see, though, is Manchester City held accountable if they're guilty. I think the punishment needs to be severe. I don't think the teams that finish second or runners up should be given the titles, because they'll always
apart
be
from the Carabao
against
Cup
them
in 2021.
Well, but that wouldn't even be given to us. Because
no, I know. I'm just joking.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I just want to see. I want to see, a better situation where owners, where football clubs. I think it's only right. Like I've always been saying this. I think that living within your means should be applauded in every other walk of life. If you're a charity, if you're a government, if you're an individual, and you live a credit card life cycle, a credit card lifestyle, that is a problem. Yet in football, it's encouraged, and I think that is a problem in and of itself. I think that clubs should be applauded for being able to generate sustained revenue streams within their own fan bases, and more teams should be doing that rather than looking for sugar daddy ownership.
Yeah, and I guess if the noose does tighten, as you say, Tottenham are all of a sudden potentially going to be in a much stronger position, and maybe they're going to, not only are they going to be in a strong position, but they might be the model in terms of what people look at in terms of an ownership. Right now, for them, they're competing with essentially states at the moment for in the Premier League, and obviously a lot of the times we haven't been able to spend the same money, but if I think this could have if this does have big implications, if they are found guilty and maybe teams are rethinking, how they can operate, then all of a sudden Tottenham would definitely, in my opinion, be in a very different position than they are right now. And I think a lot of fans would start to think of it in a different position if essentially the financials if they start to clamp down on them seriously, then I think Spurs would be in a very strong position, in my opinion. Yeah. So it'd be very interesting. I think in the next few years or so, couple years or so, until this is all decided and how this plays out, I think does really affect us, in my opinion, because of how we run our club.
It's interesting, isn't it? It's really interesting, and I want to know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you think these Man City charges do affect Tottenham? Does it make you rethink your ENIC stance? It's been a very interesting debate, interesting topic to discuss. Any closing words from you, Sean?
No, not at all. Yeah, I agree with you guys. I don't want anyone to change their mind necessarily, but just be open-minded, see what the world, see the way that we're going. We'll wait for this whole thing to figure itself out, and hopefully Tottenham will be a beneficiary of any future outcome. So, you know, it's good news for us, I think, more than anything else.
Let's hope so, Sean. Let's hope so. But thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Like, subscribe, and comment. And as always, come on, you Spurs.
Spurs.